Of the thousands of blacks the tribes brought with them, their slaves.
My mammy and pappy belonged to a part Cherokee named W.P. Thompson when I was born.
The woman reading is my sister, Elaine Ford Staton, but the words are those of our great-grandmother, Phyllis Thompson Pettit, whose Georgia-born parents were brought by the Cherokees over the trail. Johnson Thompson was Phyllis's brother.
Before that, Pappy had been owned by three different masters. One was the rich Joe Van, who lived down at Weber's Fall, and another was Chief Lowry of the Cherokees.
My cousin, Maurice Shepard, reading the words of his great-grandfather. The interviews were conducted 52 years ago here at Fort Gibson, Oklahoma, when both my great-grandmother, Phyllis Pettit, and her brother, Johnson Thompson, were in their 80s, part of a federal writers project. Now, both of them are buried in this cemetery. But after I read their words, I was set on a mission to find out how my family became slaves of the Indians. I learned that beginning with the administration of George Washington, it was the policy of the U.S. government to civilize the Indians by teaching them modern farming techniques.
To adopt agricultural practices that patterned after the whites, and one of those in the South was slave trade.
I don't ever talk about it very much because I think it's a very shameful part of Cherokee history, and so I've purposely avoided involving myself in that whole issue.
While the current chief may be ashamed, at the Cherokee Museum today are slave bills of sale, including one for 3 slaves bought in 1841 by then Principal Chief John Ross. The chief and his brother Lewis were among the biggest slaveholders in the tribe.
What's the first thing they do to make sure that black folk stay in an underclass position, just as you were doing slavery and Jim Crow semi-slavery? Give me the number one thing they would do. First thing they would do is this. They always use very broad and ambiguous headings or terms to confuse black folk, to mislead them, to misdirect them, so they won't know what's going on.
So white people will tell you that all lives matter, but they don't even believe all reparations matter. They will say all lives matter, but they don't even believe all reparations matter. This is hypocrisy on the highest level.
Now, this is not an accident. This was first created and used and implemented in 1789, when they were drafting the United States Constitution. And they met up in Philadelphia and said, we're going to craft a constitution, and but what we're going to do is create a new democracy. We're going to attract people from around the world to come here for new opportunities and new freedoms and new rights. But to do that, we got a problem. How we're going to do that at the same time our purpose is in building this country is to use black people and their labor to do it. If we craft a constitution that says we are the cradle.
You can think of the vaccine almost as medical reparations. It's the 40 acres and a mule, but of 2021. So we really should be giving this vaccine preferentially to people of color, I do believe.
Man, sit your dumb ass down.
The same scientists that are telling you they want to help you are the same ones invested in the companies that are producing the vaccines. You believe that all of a sudden your enemy, who has continually targeted you educationally, spiritually, morally, ethically, financially, agriculturally, in every single way of life, familially, well, all of a sudden, wake up when they say, it's wrong to be killing black people. I think we should love them. And all the laws on the books that target us are going to be reversed overnight. All of these policies that push the chemicals into our communities every single day are going to be switched overnight. All the investors in these chemical companies that are injected into the food or the lack thereof that go into our community, they're all of a sudden going to say, you know what, let me take this money out of my pocket and stop making money. Because I care about them more than the money I'm making. You got to wake up.
Doesn't make any difference what else you have. If you don't have some place to rest your head, you're in bad shape. Here in Harlem, the reason we say that housing is such a key problem, when you live in a poor neighborhood, you're living in an area where you have to have poor schools. When you have poor schools, you have poor teachers. When you have poor teachers, you get a poor education. And when you get a poor education, you are destined to be a poor man and a poor woman the rest of your life. Poor education, you can only work on a poor-paying job. And that poor-paying job enables you to live again in a poor neighborhood. So it's a very vicious cycle. And usually these bad housing conditions result from the fact, as Mr. Gray has pointed out, of absentee landlords, people who are rich and live downtown and let you and I live up here in the shack. Actually, it's a form of 20th century slavery.
See, unlike America would have us believe, the greatest problem confronting this country today is not pollution and bad breath. It's black people. It's black people. See, that's just one of the big lies that America tells you and that you go for because you chumps. You go for it. One of the lies that we tell ourselves is that we are making progress. But here his chair is empty. We're not making progress. We tend to equate progress with concessions. We can no longer make that mistake. You see, when they gave us that nigger astronaut, you say we were making progress, but I told you they were going to lose him in space. He didn't get that far. You put Adam Powell in office and you couldn't keep him. What you think they're going to do with Thurgood Marshall when they get tired of him? They gave you Walter Washington of Washington, D.C., and you said we were making progress. That's not progress. See, it's no in-between. You're either free or you're a slave. There's no such thing as second-class citizenship.
I wasn't supposed to stop at night to buy any gas or do anything, not even to use the bathroom.
If you had to relieve yourself, there was always some kind of can in the back of the car. And mostly for the adults, because with the children, they just open both of the car doors, and the kids stood between the car doors, and you used the potty.
Washcloths, some wet, wrapped up in wax paper. I don't recall that we even, in my early travels, that we didn't have any plastic bags. Yeah, it was wrapped up in wax paper because we'd have to use the bathroom on the side of the road.
You tried to get everything you needed when it was daylight. That included gas. If you gave them a 20 to buy gas, you didn't get any change back. And if you said anything, they might cause the law or hit you upside the head. Wasn't no change. You didn't get no change. So what you tried to do is buy what little gas with the smallest money you had.
We would look at green books and we would look at things to sort of help us figure out where we could go. But the one thing I learned more consistently was that my father believed that the only place you bought gasoline from was from Esso, which is now Exxon. He would drive around, almost running out of gas, passing Shell stations until he could get to the Esso. And finally I asked him, I said, okay, help me understand this loyalty. And his argument was that in the 30s and 40s, when he was a kid going to visit his father's family, Esso was the only gas station that would allow black people the dignity of using the toilet on equal terms as white visitors.
On site, the African invited the European for dinner. That's the first thing he did. The Indian invited the European for dinner. The Polynesians invited the European for dinner. Now, if you invite people for dinner, first place, you've got plenty dinner, and you have a society that is traditionally hospitable to strangers. The Indians invited Christopher Columbus for dinner, the first thing they did. All right, now let's look at what was happening inside of Christopher Columbus's mind, and we can go to his own diary for this. He said, I wonder why they're so friendly. They'll be easier to conquer than I thought they would be. I wonder why they're bringing such small amounts of gold. I wonder where the mines are. His intentions were not good. It wasn't good then. The intentions are not good now.
When the Moors first came into Europe, they were coming up out of a lot of different situations, a lot of different diseases. Africans brought in the concept of soap. They brought in something that they called alcohol, A-L-K-U-H-L, and today we call it alcohol. They realized that the great majority, upwards of maybe somewhere between 95 and 98% of Europe was illiterate. Now, illiterate, we have to understand, is that the world was an agricultural world. there was no real reason to study the higher levels of science and arts. But in Africa, these subjects had been in place for thousands of years, and they brought these universities in, and they began to build these universities, and they began to educate the people.
First, you can't learn all these things in the public school system, or that includes college. You have to learn on your own outside of the system. You have to do your self-education, your self-evaluation, which means you're going to be lonely, because nobody likes a smart Negro. I mean, if you're trying to be intelligent, talk about your history and be more aware, you're going to turn a lot of black people off.
Sometimes in order to get peace, you have to just be honest. And sometimes it's better to get angry in order to... otherwise, I always think that if you keep something back from somebody, it's like each time you hold something back, or it's like a lie, or it's like a brick wall, and every time you do that, you put another brick in the wall, and then you block them out completely. So I believe in the truth.
The Bible was used to psychologically castrate black people. Showing black people Jesus. I would never serve a white man if I knew my God was black. That's impossible. I'm not serving a white man if I know my God is black. The Bible was used to psychologically castrate black people. That was not used to benefit black people in any way, shape, or form. It's all about the subconscious, and that's the way things work these days. TV, social media, all this stuff. It's to penetrate your subconscious. That's it.
I said Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are merely fragments from the periphery of the African spiritual system that you call voodoo. People said, you can't even go there with that. I can go there with that. And I can take on any theologian that you got, bring them down, and I'll show you. Give me your 12 tribes, give me your 12 disciples, give me your 99 pearls of faith of Islam, and I'll show you those are nothing but sets of qualities and attributes, and I can juxtapose them in a perpendicular line besides the Orishas of the Yoruba, besides the Loas of the Voodoo, besides the Netjas of Egypt, and show you we're talking about the same system.
Jesus is a name which did not come into existence in the English form until the 1600s. The letter J was not invented until the 1600s. Let me say this again. The letter J was not invented until the 1600s. So the reality is Jesus is not the name of that person.
The God of the day or the God of the living means that in actuality, the God of these two eyes, which is the cheek, he creates this illusion around you, which is a hologram. The God of the dead is inside of you. Where's the God that died? Jesus died on the cross. Where's the cross? If you stand up and put your arms out like this, that's the cross.
Greetings, Earthlings. How y'all doing out there? This is Shadra from Elevate Consciousness. And today I wanted to talk about one of the greatest cartoons of all time, He-Man. By the power of Grayskull, I have the power, He-Man. He-Man represents the higher divine enlightened self. Specifically, He-Man is the higher self of Adam, the name of the first man from the Christian Bible, literally the alpha male, the original man, the prototypical quintessential everyman. This higher self is not obvious to the five senses. It is omnipresent yet invisible and intangible, only to be evoked when called forth by vocalizing the intention to release it. Only the truly awake will see it in everyday life. Only those with access to the third eye biopsycho-spiritual technology. Though it is obvious that He-Man and Adam are the same person, in the reality that He-Man inhabits, no one can believe such an average humble person could be so powerful and magnetic. Such is the case with Superman and Clark Kent, Batman and Bruce Wayne, Neo and Thomas Anderson. Within every so-called average human lies the door to an elevated being. It is the true God particle within us. The sincere humility of Adam is what allows him to access this great inner force. He becomes He-Man by holding aloft his magic sword and speaking the magic spell. By the power of Grayskull, I have the power. The Grayskull Castle, the source of He-Man's power, represents the Gray Skull. And the power inside the skull is the power of consciousness, or what you could also call spirit. There is evidence to suggest that the door to this higher self lies within the pineal gland, a small pinecone-looking gland in the middle of the brain. To unlock the power requires using your magic sword. The magic sword represents the light, the will, and even the soul. It represents power as well as cutting to the truth. It is the number one and the lingam, the male principle. He-Man holding up his magic sword parallels the King Arthur legend when Arthur pulls the sword from the stone to become king. Your king or queen self is the higher divine self, and the crown represents the halo of awakening. It is the crown chakra of enlightenment. Buddha is the higher self of Siddhartha, and Christ is the higher self of Yeshua. We each have the ability to unlock the light and power inside of our gray skulls. Interestingly, He-Man never uses the magic sword for violence. He only uses it to unlock the power of He-Man. When He-Man holds up his sword, he is struck by lightning and thunder, the Vajra thunderbolt of enlightenment in Buddhism, the divine symbol of awakening and indestructible force, the signature weapon of Zeus, king of the Greek gods. Skulls are a deep symbol that represent enlightenment and transcendent knowledge that goes beyond the material world and the flesh. The skull also represents death, and this is more so the case with Skeletor, who looks like the Grim Reaper with his hooded visage. On He-Man's chest, he wears the Iron Cross, representing strength and bravery. The original cross symbol was overlaid on a circle and represents the sun. He-Man is the sun, light, and life. Skeletor embodies night, dark, death, and fear. He-Man and his friends must, as he says, defend the secrets of Castle Grayskull from the evil forces of Skeletor. Thus, they must defend the skull from fear. Losing to fear means losing all of the power. To protect the castle from fear, they use the secret powers of the Gray Skull, of consciousness, of spirit. The only people who know He-Man's secrets are Man-at-Arms, the Sorceress, and Orko. Man-at-Arms represents He-Man's left brain and masculine consciousness. Man-at-Arms is a master of math, science, technology, war, and the physical body. The Sorceress represents the right brain, the emotional and spiritual side of consciousness. It is the female aspect that represents feeling and intuition. The Sorceress can turn into a falcon and lives permanently in the Gray Skull. The Egyptian god Horus also was able to transform into a falcon, and the Eye of Horus represents the third eye which can see into the spirit world. The Sorceress represents the connection to spirit, as she is the one who gave He-Man the magic sword of power.